actually is.
I don't disagree with you at all. That was kind of my point. He just remembers this phrase from somewhere, and it seems like it's the one he wants to use.
Right.
So I got you.
I don't think he's smart enough to misconstrue.
All right.
Yeah. Well. All right. Yeah.
When the looting starts, the shooting starts. What can I tell you?
Yeah. There you go. What a horse dude. I don't know. His approval rating is now below 40%.
That's great.
Hi, Sid. How are you?
Hi, we're doing well. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, the last time I looked, it was down to 38%. But, it's hard to evaluate these things. He was behind in the polls when he was running against Clinton. So.
Well, what I think is really funny is that they finally figured out what happened to him on Saturday.
Yes.
That a bunch of Korean K-pop people said, oh, why don't you just go in and inundate the website and ask for tickets to this event in Tulsa? And that's what they did. So the guy says, we've had 1 million requests for tickets. And then 7,000 people showed up.
Oh my gosh.
Couldn't figure out what happened. It took somebody like 2 days to say, yeah, because it became a viral thing on TikTok that people asked for tickets but had no intention on being there.
Well, I wonder how many people who got these tickets actually had an impact on the attendance. It's hard to say. But even if it was only 7,000, that should be a lesson. But I doubt that anybody associated with Trump will learn the lesson. They'll twist it and misconstrue it and so forth. Hi.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did Dr. Rowe's office call you yet?
Not so
Your
far.
phone is on. You have your phone here?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm on the phone with Daniel's office. And
I'm on class.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. I knew that. I'm sorry.
That's all right. All sorts of things going on with selling the house and.
Who's selling a house? Are you selling a house?
Yeah, we're selling our house. I'm staying in Austin, but we're selling our house.
Where are you going?
Where am I going? I don't know yet.
Oh,
I'm staying in Austin.
okay.
So, yeah. Linda, however, is going to establish residency in Washington State, so we can save $50,000 over the next couple of years in tuition for Emily. Yeah, that's a big deal. So she's going to be living in Washington temporarily, and then we'll see what happens after that. But meanwhile, selling my house, I'm going to go. I don't know exactly where I'm going to go live, but my son Ben and I are examining all the alternatives. So we'll see.
Are you looking for an apartment, or you're looking for a condo, or?
I think we're looking for an independent living.
Oh, okay.
You have any suggestions, Sid?
I have a couple friends who live in Maravilla, and I have a couple of friends that live in the Village.
I've heard the Village is very nice. I haven't heard of the other one.
And I have a couple of friends that live in the Triangle. And it depends.
Isn't the Triangle and the Village the same thing?
A Triangle at the Village, and Atria is another one.
Oh, Atria. Yeah, I heard of Atria.
Yeah.
What's Mirabella?
Pardon?
What the first thing you said was it Mirabella?
Maravilla is brand new, and it's at the Domain.
Oh, really?
It's very elegant, and the Maravilla and the Village at the Triangle both have memory care situations, which is very nice. And the Atria is just pure independent living. You just got all the information I know. They all run about the same.
Well, it's like I've heard of a couple of those places before, but not the one over at the Domain. But I don't know if I want to be that far north. You know, that's it makes everything kind of inaccessible.
Do you
My
want
mother
it to depend-
lived-
Oh, there's another one. If Chuck was here, he lived there. Just a minute.
You didn't mention Westminster. I don't think.
No, I have a couple of friends at Westminster too. That's a good one.
Yeah.
My
Oh,
mother,
that's close. That's good.
can you all hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay, my mother lived at the Renaissance and she started out in independent living and then ended up moving to assisted living, which is where she was when she fell and broke her hip and ended up in the hospital and died. But anyway, it's out Jollyville Road and it was
Yes.
very nice.
Yeah, I've
I've
got
heard some,
information about
heard
that. I've
some
looked into it a
negative
little bit.
things about the Renaissance. That's why I didn't mention it.
What did you say?
I heard some negative things about the
There
Renaissance.
very well may be. I just know that she lived there and we had no problems when she was there, but she's been gone for 11 years. So
Well, I'm sure it's changed one way or the other
I'm sure it has.
between then and now.
My mother-in-law lived at Brookdale Gaines Ranch, was very nice. And then I used to volunteer at Carinthia, which is in Southwest Austin, off Southwest Parkway.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if that may be too far out, but it's lovely.
Chuck, where
Carinthia.
did you live for independent living?
I lived in, where I lived, Conservatory.
Conservatory, check that one out.
Conservatory, okay.
Yeah.
Where is
because
that?
That one is,
It's,
that one is probably least expensive of all of them. It's north. It's even north of the Domain. But these
Oh,
days, it doesn't matter.
it's at Wells Branch and right off Moped.
oh, well, I'll put it on the list. Thank you, Chuck. Well, it's after
And
12.
the
We should probably get started.
One thing they said to me, the one thing they said to me when I went to visit a friend there was that they would not raise the rent if you came in. And
Oh.
that's important because every year they raise it by 10%.
Not 10%.
And that gets to be expensive.
Yes.
Wasn't going up 10% a year when I was there, so.
All right, well, yeah, it's grist for the mill, as they say.
Hi, Irene.
I want to say one thing. This is our 9th class. And so we have one more after this.
One more after this, yes.
Original idea was to do 10.
Yeah. Well, we'll do one more after this, and then, you know, I have some ideas for other classes, but we'll do one more after this, and then we'll bring. Yeah, I mean, there's no end to the material to deal with. I mean, we're never going to finish the prophets. I mean, that's ridiculous. So, all right. So, Kim, we're going to put that section from Isaiah on the screen, and meanwhile, let's say the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher
tzidkanu b'mitzvah v'tzivanu la'asot v'divrei Torah.
Amen. Okay,
Amen.
here we go. All right, we're going to look at chapter 11, which is a pretty well-known, pretty famous section of Isaiah. And this is, you know, Isaiah is typically broken up into, depending on which biblical critic you talk to, 2 or 3 or even 4 sections. By sections, I mean different, attributed to different authors. Now, these are not authors that we have names of. They're just first Isaiah, second Isaiah. I mean, these are just different sources. And depending on how you look at it, they are, they have different thematic identities. So looking at this section, which is the early part of Isaiah, we have a certain point of view or a certain identity that is apparent as we're going to read through it. As far as the way the Jewish tradition or the way the rabbis look at the prophets, these are not distinctions that have any relevance. the point of view of the rabbis, whether you're talking about the prophets or any other section of Torah, is that they're viewed as a unitary document, not just the individual section you may be looking at, but Torah as a whole is viewed as a unitary document. There are all sorts of theories about what that really means, and if you really would like to know a very well argued and very important view of this, you might look up my rabbinic dissertation, what I wrote on here, namely, what is the nature of the text that we see and its relationship to the larger text of which it's a part. So I'm not going to go into all of that, but believe me, it is an interesting idea. Okay, so this section today is well known, as you will see. You're gonna find some parts of it that are familiar, and let's read through it as a whole, reading through chapter 11, and then we're going to come back and look at it in more detail, section by section. Can I get somebody to volunteer to read this particular passage, please?
Bill, it's your turn, buddy.
Sorry?
Okay, I'm up.
All right, you're up.
But a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse, a twig shall sprout from his stalk. The Spirit of the Lord shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence for the Lord. He shall sense the truth by his reverence for the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes behold, nor decide by what his ears perceive. Thus he shall judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lowly of the land. He shall strike down a land with the rod of his mouth and slay the wicked with the breath of his lips. Justice shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his waist. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of prey, and the fatling together with a little boy to herd them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion, like the ox, shall eat straw. A babe shall play over a viper's hole, and an infant pass his hand over an adder's den. In all of my sacred mount, nothing evil or vile shall be done, for the land shall be filled with devotion to the Lord as water covers the sea. In that day, the stock of Jesse that has remained standing shall become a standard to peoples. Nations shall seek his counsel, and his abode shall be honored. In that day, my Lord will apply his hand again to redeeming the other part of his people from Assyria, as also from Egypt, Pathros, Nubia, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and the coastlands. He will hold up a signal to the nations and assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Then Ephraim's envy shall cease and Judah's harassment shall end. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. They shall pounce on the back of Philistia to the west, and together plunder the peoples of the east. Edom and Moab shall be subject to them, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. The Lord will dry up the tongue of the Egyptian sea. He will raise his hand over the Euphrates with the might of his wind and break it into 7 wadis so that it can be trodden dry shod. Thus there shall be a highway for the other part of his people out of Assyria, such as there was for Israel when it left the land of Egypt.
Okay, let's stop there. Okay, there are a number of things here that probably resonate. One of them that I want to just sort of note and then move past it to other parts that I think that are more interesting. Okay, I still can't scroll this myself, can I?
No.
Okay.
Where do you want to go to?
Well, let's move back to the beginning. We got to figure this part out. All right. So the stump of Jesse, a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse. Does anybody have a guess as to what that refers to?
David?
Yeah, King David. He is the shoot. And who was Jesse?
His father.
Exactly. So Jesse is part of the royal household, but had fallen into eclipse. That it's a statement about the what do I say, the decline of not just of Israel in general, but specifically the tribe from which the royal house is drawn. Does anybody know what tribe that is?
Judah.
Well, yes, but it's actually kind of a subset.
Perez.
What's the smallest tribe? Does anybody know?
Benjamin.
Yes. And what's interesting in this context, this goes all the way back and refers, if we're thinking about the associations, to what story? What do we know about Judah and Benjamin?
Well, Tamar, and then Benjamin is the one who Joseph is going to keep in Israel or in Egypt, and Judah steps in and says, "Take instead of him."
Right, and Benjamin is understood to be the smallest of the tribes, the least powerful, the weakest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and he is protected by Judah. When the Israelites are, when the brothers are dealing with the attitude that's expressed towards them by Joseph, what are the factors, or name at least one of the things that's a factor that turns these brothers in a more positive direction towards Joseph? Because you recall that they had murderous intentions towards Joseph. They hated him for a variety of reasons. We know the story about the coat of many colors and so on and so forth. Not only that, also because of his lack of respect or lack of support for their common father. But what changes Judah and Reuben's attitude? It is, in fact, it is the expression on Joseph's part of the need to protect Benjamin, as he himself, Joseph, was not protected by his brothers. And you can imagine that this might have a persuasive and even guilt-inducing impact on the brothers. So just not to put too fine a point on it, but guilt is a part of the Jewish history from early on. I mean, it's understood that inducing guilt or occasioning guilt on the part of the brothers is what turns them in a more positive direction towards Joseph. Okay. So this is an image of what? Of resurgence of the rebirth, so to speak, of the tribe of Benjamin and by association Judah. Okay. So that's point number one. What does this suggest to you? Well, let me hold this question in advance for just a moment. We'll go back to the text. And we read, the Spirit of the Lord shall alight upon him, a spirit of wisdom and insight, spirit of counsel and valor, a spirit of devotion and reverence for the Lord. Who's the him?
The descendant of Jesse.
Yeah, it's the shoot that emerges from the presumably what appears to be the dead stump of Jesse. Now, where do we find an image that is recalled here? What do we know about the idea of a shoot that comes out of, despite against the the conventional wisdom, some element of a plant type of structure that seems to be dead? Where do we read about this?
Well, Ezekiel, we just read, but
Okay.
Aaron has a staff that blooms. If I remember.
Moses, yes, Moses' staff and Aaron's staff both are noted as, despite appearing to be dead, that something alive springs forth from them. So this is an image when we talk about the staff that seems to be dead, and yet a shoot or a sprig emerges from it. What is suggested? I mean, what does the staff refer to? Who has staffs?
A ruler.
Shepherds also, of course.
Yeah.
It could. One way of looking at it is the shepherd. The other way is, the king has a staff, and in important ways these are related.
Because the sheep are the people.
Yes, exactly. So, and who is the one that we think of as the person who bears or carries the staff, which is used to herd, as the word is here. Sometimes it says lead in other translations. The people.
You mean Moses?
Yeah, it'd be Moses. Sure, you bet. Moses has this staff, and he uses the staff as a shepherd would, as a way of directing, rounding up, leading, and so on and so forth, the flock. That's what shepherds do. It's also what a political leader does. Can we think of examples, not just in the Bible, but anywhere, of rulers who are known for carrying staffs?
Gandhi?
Gandhi? Oh, all right, tell me more about that.
Just the imagery that I have is that, he's,
15 inches, is that what it is?
leading people,
Yes.
in the peaceful rebellion.
Right.
It's pinned, right?
When do we see that image of Gandhi leading his people and employing a staff? The famous event in the liberation of India. There's a famous march that Gandhi leads.
This is what I said. The existing slab is 10 inches. A new foundation slab will be poured on top to an overall thickness of something pinned, right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Someone has something on. I don't know.
Yeah, go to mute.
Kerry, I think it's you. Something else is on with your computer. No, I can't unmute you there.
Yeah, but that's not what I was hearing.
Oh.
Maybe it has to do with the recording. I don't know. Well, how about, who is just speaking about? I asked a question about Gandhi.
It was Ellen, but I have to mute myself. My husband's working here next to me.
Yeah, so the new foundation slab will be poured.
I see. Okay, well, maybe that's what I was hearing. Okay, So is there a way for you to reiterate the point about Gandhi's leading with the staff?
I think Ellen is saying she can't talk because her husband is next to her talking.
I see. Okay, I didn't quite understand that. Okay, well, I don't remember all the details, but Gandhi led a important march in terms of the political process of opposing the British, and he did so with carrying his staff. Any other examples? No?
Well, I'm thinking of this line because I was working with it earlier of Christ saying, I come with a sword, I come not to bring peace. And the sword, in a sense, is kind of like a staff.
Okay.
Where he's using it to control people.
That's true. Okay. We'll accept that and move forward with that. Anybody else? Famous leaders with a staff.
Does a scepter count?
It could. Yeah, scepters are related to staff. And what do you have in mind?
Well, monarchs, Queen Elizabeth in ceremonial situations.
That's true. And
I guess, yeah, the Pope carries one, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. And who else that we see around carries one?
Didn't Wilson have a cane or something that he walked with? And would that count?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. Are you talking about President Wilson?
Yes.
I'm not, I have to say, Stan, that I'm not familiar with that. It could be. All right. I mean, these images all are kind of a little fungible. I mean, staffs and canes and walking sticks and so on and so forth all are related to each other as an image or as a symbol. Let's say, for example, that we are dealing with the Wild West, as it used to be called. Probably we can't call it that anymore. It's probably just as well. Any images that come to mind about staffs related to the West and First Peoples or Native Americans or what have you? Well, the heads of Native American tribes all carried staffs. And in fact, the staff was a way of establishing a relationship with a visitor, let's say, somebody who was a representative of the American government, as an example. There are many examples. We don't even think about them all that much. If you think about, let's say, commercials. Oh, look at that. That's a great photo. City leaders hold carved prayer staffs honoring individual Navajo something.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is part of what I was referring to. Okay, thank you very much. Example taken. When as kids, we might play some games with our friends. Can you think of an example of a game where a staff or a stick is the centerpiece? I can't hear you. Is somebody trying to say something? I can't hear what you're saying, whoever that is. I'm coming soon. Aaron's dried staff sprouted, butter. There we go. Okay. That's the example that Rick mentioned to us. How do you play? Does anyone remember how you play games like Red Rover, Red Rover? How do you play the games like that? How do they work?
I don't remember anything about a staff. But you're hiding, and then people go looking for you.
Well, that's true. But how do you know when the people looking for you have scored?
Something about a red scarf.
Could be a red scarf. There are a number of ways this was done, but the person who was the centerpiece of the game had a flag or a flag with a flag pole or so on and so forth. So there are examples of that. You know, we have, there's another example of Aaron's rod, Christian Welch Bible. Well, that's interesting. Okay. Very nice. Okay, all right, we'll leave it alone at this point. Meanwhile, the idea that the Israelites are led by Moses and I guess I could say secondarily Aaron, both of whom have staffs. The staff is a sign of their authority as part of the royal house. It's also a sign of their status as shepherds. All right. So we have this example in this particular text. He shall sense the truth by his reverence for the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes behold, nor decide by what his ears perceive. What does he use this shoot of Jesse in order to express judgment or opinion or principle or policy? What does he use if he doesn't judge by what he sees or what he hears?
His reverence for the Lord.
Yeah, what does that
The
mean?
laws of the Torah.
Yes, okay, great. What does that mean practically speaking? How would you know what it is that you are supposed to be paying attention to? How do any of us come up with the idea of what the Torah says?
I'm not sure I understand. You mean just aside from reading it and the mitzvot and
Well, you read
providing.
it, and how do you determine what the text means? Read it.
Great question.
Discuss it in class.
Discuss it in class, right? Yeah, I mean, there is a process of uncovering what the text means. Now, not to put too fine a point on it, but you know, we've mentioned this before, not in the context of this particular class, but in other contexts. There's this concept or this notion of lidrosh et Elohim, which means to inquire of God. Now, in the days of the priesthood, not talking so much about the priests operating in Jerusalem, but in these smaller cultic centers, Dan or Shiloh or wherever we're talking about, that operated as kind of oracular centers, a question will be posed to sometimes they're called Navi, sometimes they're called Choseh. A question will be posed, and this person would go into essentially an ecstatic state, as oracular functionaries do, and return with an answer. Okay, what happens when, for one reason or another, these oracular centers are not available? For example, if they are closed or destroyed as part of the Josianic revolt that we see in the book of Deuteronomy, or if, for that matter, if the temple in Jerusalem is destroyed or damaged in some way, and the priesthood doesn't function the way it's supposed to. Where would you find the voice of God telling you what it is you are required to do?
I think in your heart, or it's within yourself.
Yeah, I think that's true. But even before we get there, I mean, that's where it goes. But
In prayer.
sorry?
in that form of prayer where you pray for guidance and then see the light, if you will.
Well, prayer can be part of this process. That is certainly true. So that's one way that can happen. But sometimes prayer works that way. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you pray and you don't feel like you're getting an answer. Or where do you find sort of a ready and constant and available source of God's voice? Where is that found?
Your conscience?
Well, eventually it is the conscience, but before you get there, it's in the text. The Torah is God's word, and that word or words has a significance as a message, which includes what God has to say. It's where you find it.
Yeah, but in terms of, you started out with where do you find the meaning?
Yes.
And so how do you, there's, just because you see the words doesn't mean you get the meaning.
That's
like we were talking about earlier, that there's multiple meanings to the same words.
Absolutely. So how would you find out what is held, what is incorporated into the words that one reads? How would you?
In Buddhism, we would say it's from your experience, what you see in the world. But I don't know. I think it's a great question. How do you figure out what the text means?
Well, not just what the text means, but what reaction to the text or what interpretation of the text bears the message from God.
Yeah, and we argue about that.
We
right?
do. Yeah, which is what we're doing right now. We're having a discussion about how that actually works.
No, but if we were to look at a particular text,
Yes.
we would argue about what it means.
So how do we establish that? How do we discover that? All right, we read the text, we're agreed about that.
I'm looking at a sentence that says a spirit of counsel, which means a spirit of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you find it through teachers and people in an educational mode.
There is a way in which the meaning of a text is transmitted from teachers to students, from generation to generation. One of the functions of a tradition is that there is a repository or a body of that includes the various meanings that a text has. And the assumption not so much in our world, but in the ancient world, is that this repository is in the possession of the priests. This is the knowledge that they have. And as priests become prophets, as prophets become rabbis and so forth, their job is to transmit this repository of meaning to others, particularly to the next generation. This is what a tradition is. So initially, we start with this idea that there is a body of meaning that is communicated to future generations, particularly, but not just future generations, to others within our own generation, and to the best that is of the ability of those who have this repository, initially the priestly class, but later on prophets and rabbis and so on and so forth. Their job is to pass this on in such a way that it doesn't distort the meaning that they themselves have received. We've spoken about this idea before, that what a prophet is particularly is a transparent pass-through for what it is that God is saying, for what God's message happens to be. a priest or later a prophet who changes the message by intruding his, I suppose theoretically her, understanding onto the meaning that the text holds, is not functioning in a true and unassailable way as a transmitter of the tradition. So the idea is that there is a body of material that needs to be passed on, but without modifying or distorting or what do I want to say? Modifying or distorting or translating what has been received in such a way that the personality of the pass-through is stamped on the material.
But that's kind of impossible too, right?
Well, that is in some ways the nub of the problem. I'm no expert, but in communication theory, this is referring to what is called by many people noise. What is noise? Noise is the elements that introduce distortion into any communication. Now, way back in the day, I was what was called an audiophile. What that meant was I read lots of sound equipment that I couldn't afford to buy. And there was constant reference to signal to noise ratio. Mm-hmm. What that meant was if you were going to buy an amplifier or you're going to buy a speaker or whatever it is, your main concern was that the original sound was not distorted by the equipment itself. Mm-hmm. So that what you got was as it could possibly be the case, what you heard was what was said or played or what have you. Mm-hmm. Now that is a physical impossibility. The physics are such that there is no such example of any such perfect machine. That is true of communication in general, not just with stereo components. When we speak one of us to another, there is always a certain level of noise in the communication. Whether we want there to be or not, whether we try as carefully as we can to be as clear as possible, whatever the situation may be, that we always introduce a certain level of noise. And whatever we hear is distorted or modified by that noise, or if you like, hidden by that noise. So this applies in the reading of a text as well. You read a text and the question is, so what does the text really mean? To some degree, noise is introduced into the system. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
I am really sorry to interrupt you. I just have 15 seconds. I'm on the phone with Scott Vandenberg.
Okay, what do you want me to do?
Who wants to know if he can release information to Ben, and I said yes.
Of course.
I said that, but
right.
I wanted to.
Right.
Sorry for interrupting.
It's all right. Okay, we're dealing with I think I mentioned sale of the house and trying to do that while I'm doing all these other things. Okay, so the question that we have as human beings trying to deal with the meaning of any communication, but particularly in this context of a sacred text, which ups the ante on the importance of accuracy, is there a way that we can use to separate the noise from the actual message that is intended? That is very hard to imagine how you do, but that is what midrash is. From the standpoint of communication theory, that's what midrash is. You have the text as we have received it in the Torah, and we want to understand what the text is saying, how it is speaking to us. Now, the question is, there are two basic ways you can try to do this. You can say, okay, the way that words or sounds in general mean, how they mean, is in a what you might call a denotative way, which means that you have a word, let's say, and there is a meaning that word has. There is a correct meaning, there is a best meaning, and there are lots of other meanings that may not be so terrific, but they're the best we can do. But the idea is to recover the original unsullied meaning of the word or the sound or what have you. That is impossible to do. But there is another way to approach the problem. How else could you figure out what a text means or what a word means, just to be even, as simple as we can be? What does a word mean? How would you establish that? If you can't establish without fail the correct denotative meaning, how would you do it? This is where those of you took calculus have a leg up, because calculus as a mathematical process is about the approximation of an entity by multiplying the number of iterations that we recognize as belonging to that original sound or word or what have you.
I'm curious whether that's the reason why you need a certain number of people to study together. That's
right. That's why study in the Jewish tradition is, you can study on your own, but classically study is in what it's called a chevruta, in a group. And why? Because you multiply interpretations, and it is in the multiplication of the interpretations that we get closer and closer to what the term or the word or the verse means, not by restricting and throwing out various possibilities, but by multiplying the number of possibilities.
And probably the idea of a jury came from that.
I think that may be true. I hadn't thought of that. That's an interesting possibility. Maybe so. I mean, the idea of, in our context, is that not that we can ever really determine the one and only translation, let's say, of a particular term, but we get closer to what a term or a verse means by including an ever widening range of possibilities. When you deal with sound, it works that way as well. Sound, as we have come to understand, is about including as many possibilities, grouping it all together. What comes out of that is the best representation of the original sound. That's how it works. If you want to understand what your friend is saying, you probably have to multiply the number of examples or number of interpretations that are possible. Some of them are going to be maybe closer or further away, what have you, but none of them establishes a one-to-one correspondence. So here we are dealing with exactly this question. What is it that we are hoping to do when we deal with a passage like this? We're trying to figure out what it is that God is trying to say to us. It is not the case that we will find only one possibility.
I think you can scroll now. I changed some settings.
Oh, okay, that's great.
Right here, try it.
Okay. No, not so much.
Oh, okay. So then I'll have to work harder.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's okay. All right. So I think that where we're going to go with this for the moment, and I've lost my clock on my screen. So anybody tell me what the time is?
Sure, 12:47.
Oh, good. Okay, great. We're right on schedule. All right. So where does this image go? How do we know what it is that God wants? What is the vision? What is the image? What is the future from God's point of view? It's not deciding.
Oh, I thought you were asking.
Go ahead, go ahead, please.
Well, it's a peaceful, perfect world. It's like, but what I'm curious about is there was this promised land.
Yeah.
And everyone wanted to go to the promised land. And then it seemed like the idea of this thing that would happen later with a Messiah came after that.
Well, before we get to the promised land sort of stuff, which is interesting, don't misunderstand me. But before we get there,
this is like a promise above a promise.
I'm sorry, say that again,
please. It's a promise beyond a promise.
Yes, okay. So there is an image that we are presented with of what such a world would look like. What is this vision? What is this image that we are presented? What does it suggest to us about what the future holds?
Well, there's only love and peace.
But what's the image? You're an artist, Kim. What's the image?
Well, you see these animals lying down and being together and not eating each other, and the lion becomes a vegetarian.
Right. Yes. All of these animals, which are natural enemies, which are antagonistic towards each other, that are in competition with each other, that express viciousness and what have you towards each other in the normal state of things as they are, in the world of that God is leading us towards, there is a kind of commonality. Now, this is exactly what a flock is. Not to put too fine a point on it, but flocks cannot accommodate differences. Everybody's got to be part of the same group. And what can't you have in a flock? What's the one thing you can't have in a flock, and which it is the job of the shepherd to protect against?
Wolf.
Yeah, it could be a wolf, it could be some other
Predator.
kind of aggressive animal. You have to protect the flock from violence, from aggression, and so on and so forth. The job, whatever else the shepherd does, protecting the flock from the incursion of an aggressive animal is the number one thing that the shepherd has to do. To protect the unity or the cohesiveness or the complementarity of all the different members of the flock. This is such a crucial idea, because what we're being taught here is that the goal of life, political, social, economic, and so on and so forth, is not unrestrained competition, not unrestrained aggression, but the vanishing of such qualities in the face of even the most deeply seated, natural, if you want to put it that way, qualities that we encounter in the world around us. You might make the argument that this is, as sometimes people do, and I don't want to, use the C word, but the idea that somehow competition, aggression, violence, and so on and so forth, is embedded in the way the world works. It is the nature of things, and our best course of action is to simply accept that reality. Well, that's one way of looking at things, but that's not what's being propounded here. What's being propounded here is that we will eventually, it is our job to eventually arrive at a world in which these natural aggressive tendencies or violent tendencies are challenged, withheld, transformed, what have you. And despite the fact that the lion is the way the lion is, and the sheep is the way the sheep is, and so on and so forth, in this world, which is often called the vision of the peaceable kingdom, despite what we would normally think to be the nature of these animals, that is not how they're going to interact with each other. That is how they interact with each other now, but it will eventually not be how they interact with each other. So in a way, I think it's not unfair to say that the goal is to transform the world as we have it now into a world in which operates by different laws, by different standards, by different qualities. And even, as I think it was Kim who pointed out, the lion becomes a vegetarian. I mean, gee, what could be more against the grain, so to speak, than lions or tigers or bears? Well, not bears. Bears are vegetarians mostly. But lions and tigers eschewing hunting and eating other animals and so on and so forth. Okay. If that is the direction that the future world will lead us in, the question is, okay, what is our role as human beings now in a world which has not been transformed in that way? What are we supposed to be doing in a world where the wolf doesn't dwell with the lamb, the leopard doesn't lie down with the kid, and so on and so forth? The cow and the bear shall graze, the young shall lie down together, and the lion, like the ox, shall eat straw. These are, we have this idea earlier on in the Exodus from Egypt. The plagues are all about the ways in which God proves its power, because what God does is against the conventional. It's against nature. It defies the way the world supposedly works in ways that cannot be changed. Evidently, we're called upon to look at it in a different sort of way. Who is the little boy? This is, for some people, this is the $64,000 question. Anybody know? Who is the little boy?
I'm not seeing a little boy.
Oh, well, you need to look at...
You might be able to scroll now.
Line 6.
Yeah, verse
Line
6.
6.
The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of prey, and the fatling together, and with a little boy to herd them. Now, in most translations, it says a little boy will lead them, but herd them is probably a better translation. But in any event, there's some little kid who is in charge of all this and is leading them. What?
So this is David when he first is encountered by Samuel.
Yes. And how does David demonstrate this, Rick?
How does David? He plays a flute and sings a song, and everybody thinks he's a wonderful young man.
That's true, but he's not without violence. I mean, after all, he kills Goliath, right?
Well, we hit. I'm reading this through, and I'm saying, the end of this section that we haven't, looked at while we're scrolling also says that, you know, this new guy is going to plunder, you know, going to throw the Philistines into the sea, and Edom and Moab and Ammon shall obey him. And
Yes.
you know, there's still going to be good guys and bad guys. There's still
There
going to be
are.
somebody who's in charge of what other folks are up to. So it just seems to me that there's you know, there's a possibility of that interpretation that has to do with who should be in charge of everything and who should do what I say they should do.
So let's go back
opposed to that we all live in peace.
All right. We should all live in peace, but until we get there, what should we expect? What is the job of the shepherd? That's who this little boy who's going to be leading all these animals is. He's a kind of a shepherd. And what is his job? Are he there to protect the flock? How does he do that? If the marauding wolf comes to knocking at the door,
he's going to be stronger than, or he's going to defeat, or he's going to chase away or overcome whoever that enemy might be.
Sure. And I think it's important to bear in mind that being the leader of the flock, being the shepherd as it were, is not 100% a non-violent job. Violence might be necessary in order to protect the flock. Being a good defender is not just being willing to accept the marauding presence, but being able to deflect it. And that may require something more than just good intentions or a peaceful purpose. So could it include opposition, military or otherwise, to enemies around? Yeah, it could. And that's why it's David who, after all, is the symbol of what? Of defending the Israelites against the mortal enemy Goliath and killing Goliath. He doesn't talk Goliath out of attacking the Israelites. He doesn't, convince him by reason of argument or policy or what have you. Ultimately, he has to take the recourse of killing Goliath with the slingshot.
Mm-hmm.
That is part of the job of the shepherd too. So, apropos of the point that was made just a short time ago, it shouldn't be a surprise that part of the job of whoever is the one who's going to lead the Israelites will be to deal with the enemies that surround them. I think that many people would like that to not be the case. We would all feel, not all, many of us would feel much more comfortable without an opposition to the enemies that surround Israel. And I'm speaking not of not Israel, but of Am Yisrael. And yet, even though it makes us uncomfortable, even though we would like to be living in a world where you don't have to contend with that, the reality of this vision is that from getting from point A to point B, from where we are now to the peaceable kingdom, will require from time to time the exercise of force or of violence or opposition, as well as something much more pliant. All right, so we have to, I think we've reached our time limit, sad to say. I think there's a lot more stuff to talk about here, but I can't see my clock, Kim, am I right about it?
Yeah, 103.
Oh, 103, okay. All right, so I think it's worth taking a few moments to consider the rest of the passage if you have time between now and our next meeting. We did not get to these quotations from Isaiah about peace. They're worth taking a look at, and you'll find some interesting material there as well. So I'm going to suggest that you guys do that as I won't call it a homework assignment, but if you have a moment here or there, it's worth taking the time to do that. And meanwhile, I will send Kim some additional material for our 10th and final session next Monday. I want to tell you, I hope I will say it again next week, how terrifically enjoyable this has been working with you guys on this material. I hope you have found it so as well. And I'm going to try to come up with something really, what do I want to say?
Compelling.
Something really spicy for our last meeting. All right.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi? Yeah, one of the things we might want to do is look later in Isaiah, and it's also duplicated in Micah. The passage begins in the end of days, it shall come to pass. As a contrast.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Maybe we'll do that one. I'll take a look at it and see what I think. But yeah, that's a great suggestion, Stan. I appreciate it very much. Okay. All right. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you next Monday, if not before.
Okay. And Kerry, could you stay on? I want to try one more thing in terms of you scrolling.
Sure. No problem. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye, all.
I'd like to say, be safe, keep moving. I think both are very good injunctions. Okay,